Hello and welcome to Syriac Origins. This is the second video that I've produced concerning Hanna Hajjar. I actually had no intention of making this video. I didn't want to deal with any more of his nonsense. I even had another video completed to present this month. However, Hajjar himself made a very special request that I make my next video specifically about him. So on this one occasion, I thought I will oblige. Rather than spending time with multiple explanations, I've put together this top 10 list of Hanna Hajjar's historical lies. Keeping in mind these are deliberate acts of deceiving his readers, lies that I've identified with very little effort by quickly reading through his articles in a very short period of time. It's important to note that this is not an exercise in pointing out the historical faults in his articles. There are plenty of those. I may deal with them in a future video. This isn't even about identifying the innocent mistakes that he's made. Everyone makes mistakes. On the contrary, this is about identifying the deliberate acts of deceiving his readers through falsification, misquotation, and the manipulation of evidence. Hajjar has made a habit of this, and these examples need to be pointed out. These historical lies really do get more and more ridiculous as we move down the list. So here they are, Hanna Hajjar's top 10 historical lies. Starting with lie number 10. Refer to the Syriac Origins video called The Hidden Pearl, where Hajjar misquotes Dr. Sebastian Brock. The link is in the description section of this video. Hajjar looked for a translation in a language most people don't know, Dutch, instead of just using the original English that was readily available. At the time, page 8 of The Hidden Pearl was also visible on Google Books. The actual quotation in the Dutch is only 3 lines long, and yet Hajjar's 2015 translation managed to insert 6 phrases that weren't actually there. At the time of producing this video, Hajjar has still not apologized for the misquotation, despite being asked a number of times. The article is still available on his website and the quotation has still not been corrected. Lie number 9. In Hajjar's article, The Nestorians and the Assyrian Name, Hajjar writes, so here's the clarification. If the Nestorians were not calling themselves Orthoroye in their own spoken Syriac Aramaic language, and if the British were the ones who introduced them to the name Assyrian, then the translation would have gone directly from English to Arabic, and hence, etc., etc. Now here's the thing. The name Assyrian being introduced to the Nestorians did not happen. Nobody is arguing this point. The Nestorians, the Syriac Orthodox, and the Chaldeans, etc., prior to the 19th century AD were aware of the name Assyrian in its many forms in the Aramaic language throughout the Christian centuries, meaning the name was not introduced, and hence the word has its opportunities to evolve in the Aramaic language. The introduction of the name Assyrian is not what is being argued. Nobody wiped the name Assyrian from history. There are many languages that kept using the name, even in Aramaic. What changed in the late 19th century was the way that the name Assyrian was used. Hajjar continues with an explanation of the derivation of the TH, T, and SH sounds within the Syriac word for Assyrian. An explanation that may be significant if the historical consensus was the name Assyrian was introduced, but that's not the consensus. For someone that is a self-declared not an expert in Syriac, why is Hajjar attempting to come up with such an explanation anyway? The actual view is the appellation Assyrian was allocated to the Nestorians by the British, then began to identify as ethnic and national Assyrians. Assyrian would eventually become used by the Nestorians themselves as an ethnic appellation instead of the word Suraya or Syriac. The word Assyrian was not used in this fashion earlier, so finding examples of the name Assyrian during the Christian period is not a contradiction of the concept. A reader of Hajjar's article wouldn't know this, because his article has no references being a common theme in his articles. Now I realise that there are many of our modern day Assyrian friends that will adamantly refute this, but that's not the point of this video. We will give this issue the time it deserves in a future video. Dr. John Joseph, who wrote one of the most highly regarded books on the matter, has a section of chapter 1 called "The Bible Kept the Memory of the Assyrians Alive." So there's no suggestion that the name was introduced. Either Hajjar is misrepresenting the consensus to his readers, or he hasn't read Joseph's book. In fact, which book has he read? Which paper is he refuting? There is no mention of any academic view. The lie here is Hajjar states that this is a claim made by the Arabs and so-called Arameans, when in reality Hajjar is completely aware that this is the academic consensus. In an attempt made to hide the academic consensus from his readers, he labels this a claim made by Arabs and so-called Arameans. That way, he can also forego all the supporting evidence and trivialize the topic by implicating an ongoing identity rivalry with the Arameans and an Arab conspiracy against the Assyrians. Either way, it's a lie. Seriously, all he had to do was read the first chapter. Lie number 8. In Hajjar's article, Syria got its name from the King Asuros or Asyros, a quote that supposedly came from the famous Syriac father King Asuros. In his works, Bar-Salibi attempted to explain where the word Syriac came from in his book of refutations. Bar-Salibi's understanding is that the word Syriac came from the King Asuros, a view that is more than likely incorrect historically. Hajjar uses Bar-Salibi in his article to criticize the views of Dr. Gabriel Rabo by writing, "Obviously, Gabriel Rabo's quest is not academic or scholarly, but rather a propaganda one, because he is allergic to anything Assyrian, including Assyrian names." So what is this criticism based on? Some modern-day Assyrian nationalists in Germany have attempted to Assyrianize Bar-Salibi's writings in a 1983 publication of Bar-Salibi's book by adding the Syriac letter Ola to the beginning of the name Suros, changing the word Surus to Asyros. This in turn changes Bar-Salibi's writings to accommodate a modern-day Assyrian political agenda in relation to the etymology of the name Syriac. It is this publication from 1983 that Hajjar uses in his article. So let's compare this 1983 version to older versions of Bar-Salibi's manuscripts. And as we can see from the older versions, there is no doubt that he used the word Suros. And even in this version, the name Suros is used, but before anyone chimes in with the word used here is Suros, the editor explains this means Suros in the table of contents. Hajjar claims, according to Gabriel Rabo, he corrected Bar-Salibi and said it should be Suros, not Asyros. Well, according to the earlier texts, it actually is Suros, so Gabriel Rabo was right. The accusations Hajjar labelled against him were false. The individual that edited the 1983 version is now deceased. I was able to get in contact with the other individual that has credits in producing the book from 1983. He was very evasive in giving an answer as to which Bar-Salibi manuscript was used to produce the 1983 version, which is more than a little suspicious. It's a pretty straightforward question. This is all very nice, you may be thinking, but where is Hajjar's lie in all of this? So far, he looks like an innocent victim, since he's following the reference from 1983, right? Wrong! Let's just read the very next sentence. Notice here I'm reading from the image Hajjar uses in his own article. A Kanadov Shmer Dilhun Dionoye Men Yun Hanfo Mhe Hnan Ger Bnai Orom Ithang Wa'al Shmer Methaqlin Hui Bazba Oromoye. And what does this translate into? Comparing the Greeks to the Syriacs, he's telling them, in the same way you Greeks got your name derived from Yun the pagan, we, referring to the Syriacs, are the sons of Aram, and from his name we were called Arameans. A very important bit of information for someone with his own history website based on the topic of Assyrian/Syriac identity to leave out, assuming of course he actually read the next line. As we go through this top 10 list, you'll probably join me in my suspicions in thinking Hajjar can't actually read Syriac. I've asked him this in the past if he knows how to read Syriac, and he's very evasive in answering. Line number 7. Hajjar describes the single dots in Syriac representing the end of a sentence as being introduced in the 20th century. He writes that the single dots are something new to Syriac manuscripts. They started to be used for the first time around the 20th century. Any old Syriac manuscript that you pick up, you will never see the use of the one dot as separation between words or paragraphs. So rather than providing a sample from the book he is referring to in the article, which is Michael the Syrian's Chronicles, no, of course not, that would make too much sense. Instead, he provides an image from a different book, a small book that is barely 4 words a line, so the number of sentences on the page are limited, and his reader can't make a decent assessment of his claim. Not that one example is a decent assessment. If Hajjar was being honest with his readers, he would have used an example from Michael's Chronicles. We know that Hajjar does have examples of Michael's Chronicles because he's used them in other articles on his website. So let's go to his website and find examples from the book he's actually referring to. As you can see, there are plenty of single dots here. In fact, it's the 4 dots in the shape of the cross that are limited. So by Hajjar's logic, this page is made up of only 6 sentences or paragraphs. This is obviously not the case. So going back to Hajjar's quote from his article, any old Syriac manuscript that you pick up, you will never see the use of the one dot as separation between words or paragraphs. Let's fathom exactly what he's done here. He wrote an article about a book where the book itself contradicts his false conclusions. Keeping in mind, he's actually got pages from that book he can refer to. So instead of using those pages, he presents a different book to his readers to use as an example, a book that will make his theory more difficult to debunk. No one can make such a mistake. Hanna Hajjar is a liar. Another thing you'll notice from Hajjar's article is the use of the single dots has changed recently in the Syriac language, but then makes the assumption that the use of the 4 dots was consistent for thousands of years. Why refer to a change and then assume a consistency in how the dots were used for thousands of years? It doesn't make sense. The topic of the dots across the life of the Syriac language is beyond my scope of knowledge, and certainly beyond Hajjar's, and yet he makes these claims without referencing any expert in the field. In fact, you'll notice that most, if not all, of Hajjar's articles don't have any references at all, because Hajjar's articles are made up of nothing but conjecture. Line number 6. Hajjar describes the single dots in Syriac in the same way he described them in line number 7. Hajjar falsely accuses Professor Solmer Dr. Kifa and the late Syriac Orthodox Bishop Chichek of forgery in their use of the dots in Michael the Syriac's book from 2006. Hajjar cites the sentence Chaldeans, Assyrians and Arameans that are Syriacs. Hajjar uses the dots argument listed in line number 7 above to claim that the 2006 version had been falsified by writing add 1 dot here and 1 dot there. So let's compare the versions that we have available to us to see if the dots were added as Hajjar claims. In the spirit of full disclosure, I think it's only fair to warn you that I have not seen or read the 2006 version, but instead I'm working from the sentence that Hajjar is quoting within his article. Having said that, what manuscripts do I have available to check this quotation against? The Edessa Codex dated 1598 AD and the Cabot facsimile of 1890. So let's go to both these versions, compare them to the line Hajjar uses in his article. As we can see from Hajjar's article, the line used matches the dots from the older versions. So not only does Cabot use the exact same notation as the Edessa Codex, the Edessa Codex uses the same notation as the 2006 version according to Hajjar's article. Despite this, Hajjar has accused 3 people, and I quote, of adding 1 dot here and 1 dot there, not realizing that this was not used in early Syriac manuscripts, when in reality all they did was appropriately maintain the copy of the manuscript. even according to Hajjar's line in the article. How is it possible for anyone not to pick up on this if he had done any research on the topic? Hajjar is simply lying to his readers. Let's just take a few seconds to go through Hajjar's article to see how he refers to not only the three authors, but the Arameans in general. As you can see, this is nothing more than propaganda and hate-mongering. Let's move on to line number 5. Claims the word Assyrian was an Aramean nationalist invention of about 40 years ago, sometime during the 20th century. This claim is completely absurd. In fact, it's so absurd there's no need to argue against it, since in this video all I'm doing is identifying Hajjar's lies. All I have to do is show that Hajjar is lying about this. And that takes about a minute to look up the evidence from Hajjar's own website. In his article titled Syriac Orthodox Patriarch Mordechai Rabo's definition of who are the Syriac people, where he directs his readers to an image of the 1598 AD Edessa Codex. Michael wrote his chronicles in the year 1195 AD. As we can see, there's clearly many references to the word Assyroye on the very same page that Hajjar was using as a source, and yet Hajjar claims that the word Assyroye was an Aramean nationalist invention from 40 years ago. Hajjar is clearly misleading his readers, or he hasn't read Michael the Syrian's book. If he hasn't read Michael the Syrian's book, why has he written so many articles about this? Hajjar is lying to his readers. Line number 4. Hajjar makes an attempt to demonstrate that Aram Naharain is not in Mesopotamia in his article titled Location of the Biblical Place Aram Naharain. Hajjar directs his readers to a so-called map where he writes, "See this map from the year 1711 AD and note that Aram Naharain is located in the west of the Euphrates River in the Levant and not east of the Euphrates River in Mesopotamia, Beth Naharain," suggesting that this is evidence that Aram Naharain is not inside Mesopotamia. There are a number of problems here. Firstly, this is an artist's impression of paradise according to the book of Genesis, not a map drawn up by a cartographer. Secondly, I'd like to know which natural phenomenon formed this body of water, with 4 almost perfectly shaped 90-degree angles. A body of water that is almost the same size as Turkey that happens to lie in the middle of the desert. Thirdly, even Assyria, according to this so-called map, is located outside Mesopotamia, a fact that Hajjar has conveniently overlooked. The truth is, this is just an artist's depiction, where the contents between the rivers is made up of drawings of trees and mountains representing paradise. There's no room to write the words Aram Naharain or even Assyria between the depicted rivers. So the artist took the liberty of writing the words Aram Naharain and Assyria outside of Mesopotamia. A fact that Hajjar would have known if he'd bothered to read the next line beneath the phrase Aram Naharain, a line written in Latin which loosely translates into nearer to Assyria. So the illustrator is clarifying that the location of Aram Naharain as depicted in the map is not accurate and is actually closer to geographical Assyria. It is quite a ridiculous scenario for someone to present to his readers as a self-professed historian, unless of course he's trying to deceive them. Line number 3. From an internet debate in 2015 about the word Arsuri in the Armenian language, Hajjar posted a document claiming that the letter was from and translated by the Armenian government, from the Armenian language into English. Just looking at the document that he displayed, this was obviously not the case. A short investigation revealed that the document Hajjar used was from a website where only the letterhead was from the Armenian parliament, and the rest was simply from an individual on the internet that filled in his own lines in Arabic, then used a screen grab from this Google translation and tried to pass it off as a document from the Armenian parliament. Moving on to line number 2, Hajjar again arguing about the name Asuri in the Armenian language. Hajjar produced a photo of the Syriac Orthodox Patriarch Ephraim II holding a t-shirt with the words Asuri equals Assyrian, claiming that the Patriarch endorsed the view that the Armenian word Asuri equals Assyrian, when Patriarch Ephraim had expressed his view quite clearly that this was not the case. The image Hajjar presented was actually from a tasteless protest by a modern-day Assyrian political activist Nicholas Algelu. Hajjar photoshopped the hands holding the t-shirt onto the Patriarch and tried to use this to falsify Patriarch Ephraim's opinion. It's quite clear by looking at both photos that this is just a pathetic attempt at misrepresenting the Syriac Orthodox Patriarch. Line number 1. In his article titled Mor Mikhail Rabo said Waziro Orthoroyo and not Haziro Orthoroyo, where the word Waziro means minister and the word Haziro means pig, Hajjar has clearly taken an issue with the use of the phrase Assyrian pig. So as you can see, he will go to great lengths to argue against it. Hajjar claims that Michael used the word Waziro instead of Haziro, referring to Imad ad-Din Zengi. The difference is because of a mistake that was made by a scribe in the following centuries. He wrote this in May 2017. I doubt this was a reaction to my Syriac Origins video titled Michael the Syrian that was launched only weeks earlier. There are a few problems with this. Firstly, not only on this one occasion is the word Waziro not used as a title to refer to Zengi, but in the many times Zengi is referred to in Michael's Chronicles, the position Waziro is not used. In fact, the word Waziro is not used in Michael's entire book. Why is this the case? Well, it's really quite simple, because the word Waziro meaning minister is from the Arabic word Wazir or Wazir. This was only introduced into the Syriac Aramaic language in recent centuries, and certainly not at the time Michael wrote his book. The title Michael constantly used to refer to Zengi is Ataberg. He uses this title constantly throughout the book to refer to Zengi, a fact that Hajjar would have known if he actually read the book. The word Ataberg is a Turkish word meaning governor, not minister. There is a difference between a governor and a minister. Not that it matters, since the word Waziro didn't actually exist in the Syriac language at the time Michael wrote his book. The word is Haziro, pig, not Waziro, referring to a minister, and it wouldn't matter how bad someone's handwriting is. Hanna Hajjar is making this up. The bigger problem with this is in the very same paragraph that Michael uses the phrase Assyrian pig, Michael describes the grotesque fashion that Zengi used to kill the nuns, the priests and the children, etc. In other words, Zengi acted like a pig. The symbolism of Zengi acting like a pig is there and can't be missed, especially when he continues with the devouring of grapes. It is quite clear that Michael holds Zengi responsible for the destruction. Hajjar's conclusions about the Assyrian pig are ridiculous. Hajjar would know how ridiculous his conclusions are if he bothered to read the section that actually contains the phrase Assyrian pig. I've ranked this Waziro or Furoyo concept of Hajjar's as line number 1, not because of the severity of the deception, but because it's a good example of how Hanna John Hajjar operates. All Hajjar had to do was read the paragraph that contains the phrase Assyrian pig to know that the explanation that he came up with doesn't make any sense. Without hesitation, he wrote an article and propagated it to his readership. All the while, he didn't even bother to read the very paragraph he was writing about. So how did he come up with his conclusions? It's all conjecture. He just makes it up. What this demonstrates is that there's no effort made to understand the subject matter. A complete lack of commitment to the truth. but instead a willingness to argue a point for the Assyrian historical cause, where reality is the first casualty. For Hajjar, it's all about providing a response, any response, because any answer is a good answer for Hajjar. Think about it. Hajjar knows that there are young, impressionable Assyrians that will believe what he writes in defense of the modern-day Assyrian cause. Hajjar is simply taking advantage of these people. Hajjar's writings are not history. They are an embarrassment to the modern Assyrians. Hajjar's writings are depriving young Syriacs, regardless of what they call themselves, Assyrians, Chaldeans, or Arameans, of their history, culture, and heritage, and why our modern-day Assyrian friends don't hold people such as Hajjar more accountable for their behaviour. Maybe that's a question for another time. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to join our group on Facebook and subscribe to our YouTube channel.